Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Earlier today, Rahul Gandhi was convicted of defamation, and that raises two critical questions. Whilst there's absolutely no doubt that you can defame an individual and a specific institution, can you generically and collectively defame an entire class of people bearing the same surname? And the second critical question is, Rahul Gandhi's precise words were, how come all thieves have the common surname Modi? Now, that clearly means that all thieves are Modis, but it doesn't mean that all Modis are thieves. So can a non-thieving Modi claim to have been defamed by what Rahul Gandhi said? Those are two critical questions that I shall put today to one of India's foremost lawyers, Aryama Sundaram. And I'm particularly grateful that Mr. Sundaram has agreed to do this interview before he's had a chance to see the specific judgment. Mr. Sundaram, let me begin with the first of those two questions. Whilst I know you can defame individuals and specific institutions, can you generically and collectively defame an entire class of people who bear the same surname?
Karan, in fact, I think before I say anything at all on the subject, I should make one thing very clear. There is a difference between civil defamation and criminal defamation. In criminal defamation, the two things which are required are an imputation and an intention to defame. The factum of whether that person has actually lost his reputation or not is a matter which is relevant in the case of civil defamation. It's not relevant in the case of criminal defamation. Secondly, truth is a defense in civil defamation. Truth, unless it's coupled with for the public good, is not a defense in criminal defamation. Point number one. Point number two, since the issue is there must be an imputation coupled with an intention, that really goes to the root of the matter and the root of your first question to me. And let me answer it this way. Generically speaking, there is no question of a representative action for defamation. You can't say, I'm representing so-and-so, I'm representing so-and-so. So whoever has filed the case cannot claim that he is doing so because Mr. So-and-so has been defamed or Mr. So-and-so has been defamed. He has to say, I have been defamed. Now, why does he say I? And your question is, when they have made a statement about a group of people altogether, can an individual turn around and say, I have been defamed? The answer to that is, an insult to the genus permeates to the species. If I am a person who's, let's say, an Iyer, and you say all Iyers are crooks, in that case, it permeates down to me because by saying so, you are including me, and therefore I, as an individual, am maintaining the action not as representing the whole group of Iyers. Me, I, as an Iyer, say I have been defamed. So to answer your first question, yes, if it permeates down to the individual as part of that group, he can say, when you insulted the entire group, since I'm an intrinsic part of that group, I have been personally defamed, and it can be done.
I understand the point you're making, that a generic defamation will permeate down to every individual who is part of that generic group. And therefore, the individual
Absolutely.
can claim that as a Modi, when you defame all Modis, I, an individual Modi, am also being defamed. But let me pick up on how you began your answer. You said that in criminal defamation, and this is, by the way, a case of criminal defamation, intention to defame is essential. Now, when you generically defame a class of people, you may not have the intention to specifically defame an individual of that class. Doesn't that gentleman have to say that there was a specific intention to defame me beyond the intention to defame the class as a whole?
No. My answer to that is already included in my answer to your first question, which is this. If you intended to defame the class of Modis, I being an integral part of that class, your intent permeates to me.
So
and
both
therefore,
the defamation
the
and
intention
the intent,
included me.
So both
Yes.
the defamation and the intent to defame permeate from the class level to the individual level.
Of course, it's a question of proof. Whether you have shown that the statement was made with an intent to defame every member of that class. And that is a question for evidence. That's a question which ought to have gone into, would have gone into, and that we have to see.
Now, in fact, what you're saying, and I'm putting it in my language rather than yours, that even if a non-thief Modi claims he's being defamed by Rahul's generic statement, that non-thief Modi still has to provide evidence and proof of how he's been defamed. Simply asserting the fact logically is not sufficient.
I'll put it the other way. A non-thief Modi is not being defamed. A thief Modi is not being defamed because the thief Modi deserves it. If he was really a thief and he was in that community, it is only the non-thief who will turn around and say, look, you defame me. Now, it is not necessary in criminal defamation to prove that damage has actually been caused to me, unlike in civil defamation. So you don't need to prove, I don't need to prove that you actually caused me damage. It is sufficient that if the evidence establishes, and this is why the evidence is of the prosecution to establish that the accused made a comment defamatory of a class with intent to defame that class. And if the intent was to defame the class, I, being an integral part of that class, it permeates to me, although the intent may not have been to defame Aryama Sundaram. But if your intent was to defame the entire class to which Aryama Sundaram belongs, then Aryama Sundaram can say it has permeated to me. So there, I have to see the judgment. The judgment will speak for itself as to whether the prosecution established the intent to defame the class of that particular surname or group.
This brings me directly to the second question I raised in my introduction. Was there an intent to defame the entire class or group? Let's go back to the precise language Rahul Gandhi used. His words were, and I'm quoting, how come all thieves have the common surname Modi? Now that clearly means that all thieves are Modi. But equally clearly, it doesn't mean that all Modis are thieves. Therefore, Rahul is making it clear that there are several Modis, maybe many Modis, possibly the majority of Modis who are not thieves. Therefore, how are those people who are not thieves defamed by saying that all thieves are Modis?
I'd answer you straight away by saying, what is the imputation? Like I said, the vital thing there is imputation. Intention actually takes a secondary part. Imputation is the main part. Now, imputation here is that all thieves are Modis. What does that mean? There is no thief who exists in the world who's not a Modi. Therefore, thievery is a chosen profession of Modis, whereas it is not a chosen profession of anybody else.
Can I stop
the point
you at
here
that
is
point?
the use of the word all.
Can I stop you
Well,
there?
you
Point?
sup-
I know you haven't finished, but let me just stop you. The conclusion from the statement, all thieves are Modi, therefore thievery is the chosen profession of Modis, doesn't really follow. The word chosen is what I'm quarreling about. It may be a profession Modis get into, but whether it's the chosen profession, just as the Jews claim they are the chosen race, that's the one
No.
I'm quarreling with.
I was not talking about chosen being that chosen in the sense of this is the one profession we go into, but it is a profession, one of the professions that is chosen by this community. I'm not talking about chosen as in, oh, this is their main profession. Not at all. But the fact is the use of the word all thieves. By doing so, you have eliminated the existence of even one thief in the world who is not a Modi. Therefore, if you're a thief, you definitely are a Modi. It doesn't mean that every Modi is a thief, but it means every thief is a Modi. Now, I can turn around and say, by saying every thief is a Modi, and I have that surname, tomorrow, whatever I do, someone's going to look at me and say, oh my God, now I know that all thieves are Modis. Am I sure about this guy not being a thief? Now, what are you doing? When you say all thieves are Modi, what is your imputation? That there is no thief who exists in this world who's not a Modi. Now, please tell me how you would take it if I say all thieves in the world are tapas.
I'll tell you what follows from your logic. This is defamation, if it is. This is defamation by interpretation, interpolation, or imputation, to use your phrase. It's not defamation by direct and specific accusation of an individual. You're interpreting a point made to apply to another person who it may or may not cover. This is therefore a different form of defamation. It's not outright accusation, it's interpretation, interpolation.
Can I just correct you there, not from what you're saying, but from my explaining what I'm saying and the understanding of what I'm saying? I'm saying if you impute that all thieves are Modis, the fact is I am being defamed as an essential part of that community. After all, it's been said, it's the quality of the parts which show in the whole, or the whole is the sum total of its parts. Now, by your saying that all thieves are Modis, it permeates to every single Modi, because when you are saying it is generic, you take a circle. Within the circle is everybody. You have hit the entire circle. Ipso facto, you have hit every individual in that circle.
But the problem is still that the individuals in that circle who are non-thieves are hit by implication, interpretation, and interpolation.
Imputation. They are
But
hit by imputation.
But imputation
is an essential part of criminal defamation.
But it is still imputation, a form of interpretation. It's not direct accusation.
It is a direct accusation at a genus, and I am a part of that genus. Therefore, it's a direct accusation, imputation. It is not by interpretation. The moment he has said all thieves are Modis, he has hit an entire genus. And the moment you hit the genus, every part of the genus is there, which is why I started by saying, remember the difference between civil and criminal defamation. In civil defamation, it's important for that person to say, look, I have been hurt or damage has been caused to me in this manner by that imputation. In criminal defamation, it is not necessary to establish that the person who's pleading defamation has actually been damaged. That is the difference in the two.
Then there's something else that follows from the analysis you've just given me. In criminal defamation, defamation by imputation is sufficient to establish without actually providing evidence and proof of how you've been defamed. The imputation is sufficient.
Coupled with intent. Coupled with intent, which need not be a part of civil defamation. In civil defamation, there need not be intent to defame. The statement together with hurt and the damage is sufficient. In criminal defamation, intent is important, and what has to be looked into when looking into the judgment is, has the prosecution been able to bring out the intent to defame the entire group by the imputation that all thieves are part of that group?
That is something only the judgment, when it's been read, will establish. And as I said in the introduction, you haven't read the judgment, but that is therefore critical. If the prosecution was not able to establish that beyond the imputation, which flows from a generic defamation, there is specific intent to defame a particular individual, then the case becomes poorly argued and the sentencing and the conviction may become questionable.
It is sufficient, like I said here, is that it is not required for the prosecution to prove that the intention was to defame me, the complainant. Because we're talking about the generic, it is sufficient for the prosecution to prove that the intent was to defame the genus. And secondly, either you must prove the intention or say that the person could reasonably have believed that he was imputing something defamatory to that genus. So please don't take intention as being culled out of the man's heart and mind and intellect. It is sufficient. How do you judge the intention? Would a reasonable man have reasonably believed this would be the effect?
I've understood you completely. I'm simply repeating it so you can confirm my understanding. You have to prove, or at least establish beyond reasonable doubt, that when Rahul Gandhi said, and I'm quoting his words, how come all thieves have the common surname Modi, his intention was to defame all Modis, right? And
let me add, when you say intention, be very, very clear. Intention is made out sufficiently if it can be shown that a reasonable person, when he made that statement, would reasonably have known the effect of it and would have intended to say it, despite that reasonable belief that this would be it. So don't take intention as I intended at that second when I said it to do this. No, it is sufficient if I know that my words could reasonably lead to this and that it is a reasonable belief that one should have at that time. That is sufficient for intention.
But now what you're introducing is a level of judgment made by the judge of Rahul Gandhi as an individual, and how he judges him not just as an individual, but the personality behind that. And therefore, the judge will say, it's reasonable for me to assume when you said these words that in fact your intention was to defame a whole class. This is now a personal subjective judgment, no longer based upon the law, but based upon the judge's understanding of the man in the...
No, I wouldn't agree there, Karan. I'll tell you why. The evidence will have to establish that given the circumstances, given the area, given the nature of the whole speech, given everything, and given his propensity to make this kind of statement, would he have felt when he made a generic statement about the group that the intent can be assumed to be against the group? And that assumption, one of the main factors for that assumption is, would a reasonable person have understood that when he said it, it would have an effect on the group?
Except, Mr. Sundaram, you began with the words, and I'm quoting you, the evidence will have to establish. Therefore, we come back to the point. We therefore come back to the point. It all hinges upon the level of evidence given by the prosecution, and that will emerge from the judgment.
Absolutely. And it is always the job of the prosecution to prove. It is not the job of the accused to prove his innocence. It's the prosecution which has to prove it. And for that purpose, the prosecution evidence in this case, coupled with, of course, what could have been a common reasonable man's belief. Now, here I want to add one last thing before I stop on this, is that assume the prosecution establishes that a reasonable person would have said when they made such a statement, have known the effect of their statement, and knowledge can be imputed to them. Therefore, it is always open to the accused to then rebut that by saying, no, I'm sorry. When that statement was made, please take it in the context that was not within my knowledge at that time, or I judge me in this context when I said it, how I said it, that it was not said in the context of a generic group of Modis. It was said in a different context, in which case I don't know, then he'll have to say, I said it in the context of Mr. X or Mr. Y or Mr. Z, and I'm not sure whether he would have wanted to leave that kind of evidence.
Well, this is a very interesting point you're making, because it brings me to something that Abhishek Singhvi just a couple of half hours ago raised at his press conference. He said, does section 202 apply, or is this a mischievous suit? Because the speech was made in Kolar in a political setting at a political rally. The offense has been taken by an individual sitting in Surat. What is the connection between the two? And although, let me finish, although Abhishek wasn't quite making the point you've just been making, but nonetheless, the two blend together, because Rahul Gandhi could argue, my speech and my comment was made in a particular context. It is not reasonable to assume that the imputation that was implied applies to a whole genus of people. It was very specific. That specificity is determined by the context and determined by the fact it's a political speech, not a judgment of a class of people. A lot of things are said in politics for canvassing purposes that you don't necessarily hold to, just as parties make promises which they don't abide by. Therefore, that is an argument that can be conceivably made. We don't know whether Rahul made it, but it could have been.
Defamation doesn't have a special exception for politicians. A politician is as liable when he makes a speech as any other person does when they defame. And I think it's about time this country understands that defamation by whichever party, whichever person, I'm not there. Hate speeches, defamatory speeches are impermissible. But having said that, like you said, he could try to establish evidence. He could try to have other witnesses come and say, no, he told us before the speech, this is what he was planning, this is what he was doing. His mind was somewhere else. It's all a question of weighing the evidence. But what I want to point out to you very clearly is this. Once you impute, and the reasonable belief is, you did so in the knowledge of what you're doing. So if you want to defend yourself and say, look here, this was not my intent at all. My intent was something else. Lead the evidence. That's why I say, without reading the judgment, we cannot really see what was the evidence, what were the witnesses, and what was said.
Absolutely. And I just sum up that bit by saying, as you said, A, it all depends upon the nature, quality, and strength of the evidence. We'll only find that out when we read the judgment. But B, as you agreed, to an earlier question, it also depends upon how the judge as an individual interprets Rahul Gandhi in his personality and believes whether it is reasonable to assume that a person like Rahul would have intended imputation that covers the whole community. That is also a judgment the judge will have to make.
May I answer you straight away? Necessarily, a just judge will have to look at it. For example, let me say there's a man of feeble intelligence who has made a statement. Can the judge blind himself and say, no, there's an absolute objective rule? I will not look at the fact that this man had a feeble intelligence. Let us take a man who doesn't have any fluency in the language. That's something. Can the judge not say this is a man who's not fluent in the language? Therefore, it is relevant. I'm not saying the judge bases it on this, but these are all relevant considerations to arrive at a conclusion.
Absolutely. And a lot hinges on that adjective you used to describe the judge. You called him a just judge. It all depends on, if I can slightly misuse the English language, the justness of the judge. But let's leave that there, because I think you've explained the implications and the hidden answers that lie behind my questions very adequately. There's one last question I want to ask you. The sentence has been stayed by the court for 30 days, but if I understand correctly, stayed doesn't mean it's been suspended. Forgive me, it's the other way around. The sentence has been suspended for 30 days, but that doesn't mean it's been stayed. Therefore, does the disqualification from Parliament that would otherwise immediately follow also get suspended, or does that require a specific staying?
It requires a specific stay. You need a stay of the judgment. Otherwise, if a disqualification arises, it can stand. which is why you saw in the case of Navjot Singh Sidhu, I think, when he filed in the Supreme Court, he wanted a stay of the judgment itself, saying otherwise he could not stand for elections, despite the fact that there was already a suspension of his sentence. So here, it is but natural, it's a 2-year sentence, it's but natural that the person concerned is not a person who's going to flee from the law or do any such thing. And therefore, the court quite rightly has suspended the sentence for 30 days to enable an appeal to be filed and the appellate court thereafter to consider the question of further bail. And in matters like this, bail is usually the norm and usually the norm.
But as you said,
the question is going to be as to whether they're going to press for stay of the judgment and stay of the conviction, not just stay of the sentence, but stay of the conviction. Unless they get a stay of the conviction, well, the effect of a conviction against you follows so far as anything is concerned, whether it be applying for a passport, whether it be for in a case of elections, the Representation of People's Act, whatever it is.
And that means that until the conviction is stayed, and that's very clear, the conviction is stayed, the disqualification, which applies immediately, could be imposed if the speaker decides to do so, or if the speaker is approached by an MP to do so. That sword continues to hang over Rahul Gandhi's head till the conviction is stayed. And we don't know when that will happen. The staying.
Karan, I'm taking it that I'm not sure what was stayed exactly, but I take it from what you're saying is that he has just suspended the sentence and nothing else.
I'm going entirely by the reports on television that the sentence has been suspended, not stayed, and therefore the disqualification is not stayed. And therefore, if the speaker chooses to act before the conviction is stayed, he can, if he wants, disqualify Rahul Gandhi. We don't know whether the speaker will act. We don't know whether the BJP will move the speaker to act, but that is a sword that continues to hang for a while, at least over Rahul Gandhi.
In any event, by the time the notice is given and the response is got, I'm sure that they would approach an appellate court and ask for stay of conviction. That it would be what would be expected of a politician.
Mr. Aryama Sundaram, thank you very much for agreeing to speak literally within hours of the news coming out and before you've read the judgment. And I'll point out to the audience that you were answering general questions about the nature of the law, not talking specifically about the judgment itself, because we haven't seen it. But nonetheless, your general answers to those general questions are very eye-opening. And what it does suggest is that this is a fairly complex matter, not easily looked at and taken sides over. And I thank you for opening our eyes to this.
Thank you, Karan.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.